Okay, and we're live. So as a reminder, as always, this call will be recorded and posted online. Let's get started with the agenda items. Minutes-wise, Nick, can you take minutes? Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. Let me try to... otherwise, for the next call, it's currently set to June 4th, 10 a.m. PST. So back to Thursday. If anyone has any conflicts on the June 4th, let us know, and yeah, we'll try to accommodate. Good point on the CFC, Philippe. Maybe we should start with that. If you said you have to bail at some point.
Sure, yes. I mean, we just need to, I didn't see any objection on the list, so can we record the decision to ask for the extension?
I believe so. I haven't seen any objections on the list either. So from my perspective, we're good to go.
All right.
Anyone else with strong opinions on the matter of extending the charter? Okay. So I think we can record a decision.
Thank you, and I'll just do it.
Awesome, thank you. Otherwise, I wanted, like, we have a list of issues that we can go through, but I wanted first to talk about an issue that's related to a couple of those issues. Last week, we talked about resource timing issues 222 and 223, or we didn't really talk about them, but we almost discussed them, and we've discussed them previously. And I think that we need to somehow better categorize the types of information that resource timing is exposing, and see what different opt-ins fit for different types of information. So let me share my screen, and I will try to present on that front. Okay. Okay. So, resource timing information types. Basically, we have resource timing that historically only exposed timing information. We have the diagram here that includes all the different types of timing information that it exposed. We have a bunch of feature requests for processing time that people want us to expose in the future. We are also already somewhat exposing that through element timing in a way that is also, exposes timing information. And the sensitivity of this information varies. From my perspective, the DNS and TLS portions are not really exposing anything that is user specific. It's not really exposing anything that is tied to the particular user's interaction with that origin. It can expose details about the user's network status, but that information is also exposed elsewhere. So from my perspective, the most sensitive bits here regarding timing information are the time to first byte that can expose the timing that it takes the backend server to process requests for this particular user, and then client-side processing time that may be different for different responses and can expose details about the user. Then we also have something that was added in resource timing L2. We have sizing information. So encoded body size, decoded body size, transfer size, and all those information types. Look, this type of information exposes details about the user through the content that they load. So if we have content with varying sizes based on the user's credentials, this runs a risk of exposing that, mostly through transfer size. And we talked about other issues with the fact that this, for example, exposes the headers and things along those lines, where exposing the headers can reveal things about the user's state with this site, can reveal things about the size of their cookies if they're set, which can be sensitive information. Otherwise, another thing that's exposed in transfer size is caching information, because if transfer size is 0 or close to that, that can reveal whether the resource was cached in the past or whether it was revalidated if the transfer size matches the size of the headers rather than the size of the full body of the resource. And we also have a bunch of feature requests related to code caching, as well as explicit caching information to be exposed as part of resource timing. This is something that is potentially sensitive today in terms of exposing the user history. And the reason why we said it's okay is because this information is also can also be exposed in other ways, in a highly reliable way. But in a double-keyed cache world, this, at least the way that I see it, will no longer be sensitive information. So once all modern browsers will have double-keyed caches, then exposing this caching information would theoretically not require any kind of opt-in. Now, I should caveat all that just saying that this is my personal opinion with my editor, like resource timing editor hat on. This is not necessarily something I ran by Google or Chrome security folks. It will definitely be something that I will run by them, but it's not yet an approved opinion. This is my personal opinion, and I wanted to run it by the group to see what folks think.
You have?
Yeah. Yes.
So what do you mean by double key? Because we have the URL of the resource in the entry.
Yes. So double-keyed caches will mean that a URL is cached based on its own URL, as well as the URL of the top-level domain of the site that loaded it. So if I am loading a URL, I'm loading thirdparty.com from example.com, and then I'm loading this same thirdparty.com from food.com, the second load will not come from the cache because the cache key would be different in those two instances.
Okay.
And this is something that I believe shipped in Safari in 2012 or 2013, like a long time ago. And this is something that is likely to ship. I think Firefox moved to a similar model as well, and Chrome is likely to move to that model very soon.
Thank you.
In that model, exposing cache information doesn't really reveal anything because there are no history links involved because the site already knows which resources it loaded. Next in line, we have protocol information. So right now we have next hop protocol, but we also have issues in our list for exposing the explicit server IP and cipher information. I am not sure that those particular feature requests are a good idea. Also for next hop protocol, we've heard basically one of the issues that Ping has open is that it can reveal information about the user's network. On the one hand, one can argue that the same information is already exposed by the various characteristics of the resource load that are very different between H1 and H2. At the same time, maybe we can start thinking of replacing those protocol information, which is mostly useful to detect problems or reveal basically A/B test migrations. So make sure that the new protocol is better than the old protocol. Maybe this is something that can be tackled with server timing instead. Or otherwise, if that's not the case, then we need to conclude whether this is okay to expose. And if it's okay to expose, it's not necessarily something that matches any of the current opt-ins that we will talk about them later. Okay, and then we have initiator information. Currently, we expose the initiator type. We would like to also expose the actual initiator URL in a way that enables us to reconstruct the dependency trees. My assumption here is that this is not sensitive information. Mike West commented here that it might be, and at the very least, we need to make sure that we don't expose post redirect URLs. We currently don't. We need to make sure that we still don't after this, like potentially adding initiator. But my current assumption is that this doesn't necessarily require any opt-ins from the content itself. And then finally, we have feature requests for status code and content type, which seem to expose direct information about the response, which is sensitive information as it can reveal details about the user if the content is credentialed. Yeah, and then finally, we have a proposal from Nick about enabling automatic reporting of a frame to its parent regarding its various resource timing entries. That seems like something that is quite different and will require a separate opt-in. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the opt-ins that we currently have at our disposal. We have timing allow origin that we are currently using for all those types of information that we consider sensitive. There is cross-origin resource policy, which is a relatively new opt-in that enables to signify that a certain resource can be safely embedded in other contexts, even in a world where Spectre and Meltdown are a thing. So in a world where bytes incorporated into another process can be read by that process, can be read by userland code in that process. And then finally, we have good old cores that enables complete sharing of the resource across different origins. So from my perspective, and the way that I would like to bucket those different types of informations and map them to those different opt-ins, is that timing allow origin is something that only bars timing information and not much else, so that it will enable us to receive to expose the time to first byte, expose the processing time, as well as the DNS and TLS, but not other types of information. And as far as developer advice goes, it seems that it's perfectly safe to turn on timing allow origin for public resources, and potentially also okay to do that for slightly personalized resources. But basically, for resources that their server-side or client-side processing time is not likely to be impacted by any personalization that may take place, if that makes sense. Then we have cross-origin resource policy, which it seems like it's okay for it to expose sizing information. We are talking about, for example, making the measure memory API barred on Corp being enabled. So in that world, it seems reasonable to also say that sizing information will be barred on that same opt-in. From my perspective, it also seems safe to expose the timing information in those cases. Because for Corp, we assume that the resource can be embedded, so its presence doesn't really tell an attacker anything about the user. And from a web developer, like from a developer advice perspective, it seems that Corp is something that we can turn on for public resources, which are potentially not easily CORS fetched. So either for CSS resources that are hard to fetch using CORS, or in other configurations where it's hard to set CORS on the server side. And then finally, for CORS, the contents of the resources are fully exposed and fully readable on the client side. So on that front, it seems like that timing, sizing, as well as response information are all okay to expose. So yeah, any thoughts on the split of information types into those separate opt-in buckets, and whether it makes sense both from a privacy and security standpoint, as well as from a developer ergonomics standpoint? I would love to hear thoughts on both those fronts.
So I think it's very helpful to categorize all these different types of data and think through under what circumstances we may want to be able to expose them, especially related to all the proposals. So I think a lot of the times that we're getting stuck with new proposals right now is around the security and privacy concerns around them. And so if we can scope those into how would the user really opt into them in a safe manner, it seems appropriate to have these different buckets and what kind of levels of exposure there are. So I think it really helps frame those conversations.
Thanks.
So just a quick question. What would happen if you had multiple of these headers and they disagree? Like what if you had cores that allowed a particular origin, but timing allow origin that did not? Which would override in what way?
So from my perspective, the CORS check either passes or fails. If the CORS check failed, then CORS has failed. Like if CORS failed but timing allow origin passed, then that means we can expose the timing information, but not more than that. If timing allow origin failed but CORS passed, I think that since it's safe to read the resource, it's also safe to expose that information. So I don't really, basically, the way that I see it, and folks may disagree, but ideally we would have timing allow origin being a weaker variant of corp being a weaker variant of CORS. And CORS enabling us to expose all the information, corp enabling to expose a little bit less than that, but still a lot, and timing allow origin being the weakest one. And if the stronger one passed, then that enables us to expose that information, because it also means that the resource is readable or embeddable. Does that make sense?
I think it does, Yoav, but how do we how do we explain or let the community understand? I'm just saying, like, you have a beautiful presentation, you explain it correctly, like the different priority and the one that oversees that's superior to the other policy. But I'm just trying to find, like, how can we convey this this order to people so they understand, because it seems like it's a little bit complicated. You know what I'm saying? Like when you say it, it's not. But when you look at it as a series of words with dashes in between, and to make sense of what's going to happen is a little bit complicated.
So I don't disagree that the current situation is extremely complex. I'm hoping that this will enable it to be less complex by having, layered opt-ins. But I agree that explaining this to people would be a challenge. It is already a challenge and would be a challenge. And yeah, CORS is complicated. Corp is slightly more, I don't know, accessible. At the same time, it's a newer concept, so it will take people some time to get accustomed to that. I'm hoping that because there are a bunch of new capabilities that are bound behind Corp, that will enable or that will motivate people to understand Corp beyond the just performance APIs. Because there are conversations about only exposing shared array buffers in contexts where all the content is Corp enabled. Similarly to the memory measurement API, similarly to JavaScript profiling API, basically everything that is sensitive to having cross-origin resources in the same process will only be enabled in a context where all the content is Corp enabled. If that makes sense.
I think it would take some good, if we go down this path, it would take some good documentation within the spec itself to kind of lay out some example scenarios and try to verbalize this as simply as possible, but still kind of highlighting the complexity of it too,
Yeah. Yes, and this will also require, if we would go down that path, I suspect that this will give the Rum community a lot more timing information for third-party content that is course-enabled or corp-enabled. But at the same time, some of the information may be lost in scenarios that are currently, if a resource it does have timing allow origin enabled but doesn't have any of the other opt-ins, they will lose the sizing information, for example.
Right.
So there will definitely be some migration path from where we are today.
I think it's great to have those buckets. I'm just, like in a way, it reminds me when I first learned CSS, and there are different rules, there are different predecessor, if it's an ID or a class, or if you have the important symbol. And as a beginner, you don't really understand which rule apply. And then someone came with a nice way to explain the algorithm, I think he used 4 digits, 1 and 0s, to understand which one takes precedence. And I think once we have something like that with Tao, Corp, and Cores, so without looking at the specs, we can know which one is going to apply when one is not specified, will be good. So I think the bucket ID is great, but I'm just trying to see from here to when I'll be able to understand what's going to happen or what should happen. There's this kind of gap that I don't know how to fill right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, so we can understand what's supposed to happen.
What would it take to make this clearer from your perspective?
I don't know, some sort of again, I think it's more like in the documentation, or to me, I'm visual and I would love to see some sort of table where I can see that if one doesn't exist, then it moves to the next column, and then, okay, so this policy applies, so that's what's going to happen. I mean, in a way, like what Michal asked before, what if, the two conflicts, which one takes precedence? And, some sort of table to quickly understand what would happen in all those cases. To me, it's a again, I love the bucket ID, but to me, it's hard to know how one day I'll be able to explain to one of my peer how it's supposed to happen, without having like a one page where I'll see all the different cases and understand what I'm supposed to see when this policy is there or it's not there, or those two conflicts.
Yeah. Okay. Noted.
Yeah, I thought that separating it out into buckets when you see the 3 together made a lot of sense to me. And the way you answered my question was the right way that I thought you were implying. Where I'm concerned is it's not really self-documenting. Like if you just looked at the headers and you saw that timing allow origin was not enabled, you might assume that it won't be available. So it's this implication that one is thing. But I mean, these things aren't easy. They're not meant to be understood at a glance. And I wonder, there's already going to be interesting dynamic between corp and cores. And so there are already going to be solutions to how those two relate. And so we're just tagging along.
Yeah, that's my hope. I think that, so yeah, first of all, it's a shame that those are not self-explanatory, but yeah, that's a fact of life at that point. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can just use the work that will be done in order to make make it to clarify the relationship between cores and corp, to also put in Tau into that into the mix.
And that seems about as simple as you can make it.
And
no simpler.
Yeah, I couldn't find any simpler ways, but yeah. Alex, do you have opinions on the on this bucketization as well as generally on the like privacy and security side of things? Do you like, are my assumptions correct regarding sensitivity from your perspective?
They're close to correct, but I do think we generally agree with the principle that if you have access to the content bytes, then access to the timing data is less sensitive than that, and is kind of implicitly you're okay with that too. And we make similar assumptions with our WebRTC access policies. So, you know, if you have access to the camera, then you know you also have access to the microphone. That's fine. And yeah, like helping people to understand that that's the principle this is based on, and then you know have tables for the nerds. But yeah, I think that's fine. The only detail about this that I kind of disagree with is the exposure of the timing data and the DNS data in particular. Like, I don't think there's a way to view DNS timing data as well as the browser can expose it.
So for DNS,
but that's not what we're talking about here, and you know that's a side small disagreement there.
Yeah,
I don't want to disrupt the conversation there.
Sure. Yeah, so just to, a short answer on that front, like the way that I've thought about it. So I don't think I was around when this was like when the decision to expose DNS as part of timing allow origin was made, or if I was, I don't remember the exact details there. From my perspective, it seems feasible for a malicious page to add, or it seems feasible for a page to add a resource load that doesn't, for DNS DNS host that they know cannot be resolved, and then time the time it takes to fail, like for this request to fail with an on error.
Yeah.
So that seems like a decent way to time DNS.
Yeah, I mean there are side channels to gather these things, and yeah, let's talk about that some other time.
Okay, sounds good. Any other opinions, questions, thoughts, musings? Okay, so thanks, and yeah, I will run this proposal by some WebPerfWG folks to make sure that this, you know, matches their expectations and their perceived threat models of this various types of information, and we'll let you all know how that goes. Okay, cool. And with that, yeah, I think we can go over some of the issues. So on the agenda, we have resource timing issue 222, which I think mostly discusses that. So I don't think there's real reason to actually discuss 222 in this context. And similarly for 223, it's a very similar issue with a very similar solution. So let's skip to 215. Let me share my screen again here for okay. So so issue 215 for resource timing, the step to queue a task to run fire a buffer full event should specify its source. Yeah, so that seems purely editorial, and we should just do that. And it's already assigned to me, so yeah. Sorry about that. I will just do that. So in that case, we can probably look into performance timeline issue 167. So an issue opened 2 weeks ago by, I believe, an Igalia engineer. So the last step to queue a performance entry specifies that okay, so it seems like we're missing some details on how a performance observer entry list should be created from a performance entry list. So some sort of a copy constructor, if you will. Yeah, and potentially we need to fix up the performance observer callback. Nicholas, you commented on this. Do you have opinions? I haven't looked into that too deeply.
I think Nicholas may have dropped off.
Oh, okay.
He had an issue earlier with his machine, I wonder. The context objects observer buffer. Okay, so if reading through his comment, it seems mostly an editorial issue where we need to fix up the processing model where some bits of it are incorrect. But otherwise, it doesn't seem too controversial. So I think we can probably label the issue as an L2 issue and fix those editorial issues. Does that make sense for everyone? Going once, going twice. Okay, labeled. Okay, let's see then. Navigation timing, issue 125. Performance navigation timing needs a realm. Oh, okay, yeah. So currently, it seems like we're creating navigation timing
early in the hey Nicholas.
Oh, hello.
Hey, you dropped off. We were talking about earlier issue, but it seemed editorial, so we moved past it. We're now talking about navigation timing issue 125, where, if I understand correctly, we need a realm in order to create the navigation timing entry. At the same time, it may be created before the document exists, so specifying the realm may be tricky.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, technically, you could store all of the relevant variables before you can have the realm, which is kind of annoying, and then you could create the object once the realm is known. But yeah, I think it's just editorial.
Yeah, so just editorial, and we have to, keep variables around until the document is created to have a realm to create the object on. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Are there other precedents for this kind of like objects that are created before the document, or yeah, I can't
I'm
think
not
of.
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. The solution you're proposing here sounds good to me.
I actually had a quick question about this one. I was recently looking into our implementation of the performance navigation timing stuff, and would it be against the specification if we moved the availability of that timing until after the main resource had completely finished loading?
It would. Navigation timing started out that way, as very similar to how resource timing works. But there were complaints from folks that were used to the old model, where in navigation timing V1, L1, each one of the each bit of information, each attribute was filled as its timing was known.
Mm-hmm.
And folks found it hard to migrate to navigation timing L2, that basically forced them to wait until the HTML finished loading in order to know anything. So prevented them from reporting things as they go. And yeah, Nick, you can correct me on that if I'm.
Yeah, and there are cases too where a user may navigate off the page before it's fully complete, and we still want to try to capture, part of the network information, even though we don't have all of it available, etc.
Okay. Well, I will not break that then.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, so this is mostly editorial we set, and then we have 126, which folks are asking to get the HTTP status code from the response header. Yeah, this is also we have a feature request for that for resource timing, but yeah, it seems non-actionable, at least at the moment. So we can probably close this issue.
Why is it not actionable?
So you're saying, yes, we could also have it stick around for like as a feature request for L3. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Unless we think there's no clear use cases. Like, I guess it depends, right?
I think that there are use cases. I'm not sure if network error logging resolves those use cases. So if the use case is
So yeah, you got a thumbs up in your comments. So maybe just ask if there are any outstanding issues here, and then we can close it. Yeah, it probably can be resolved via error logging, because this is navigation timing, not resource timing. So
yeah. So my thinking is that network error logging can resolve the 400 500 case, but maybe the use case goes beyond that. So I can take an action item to try to drill further and ask more questions about the use case to see if this is a viable feature request or something that network error logging should solve.
So with network error logging, you would be able to get kind of an out-of-band signal about it being non-normal status code, but you wouldn't be able to get that from JavaScript, right? So like RUM would not be able to. At least I don't think the network error logging reporter, whatever it's called, or I guess reporting API reporter would have access to it.
I'm not sure. And so you're saying maybe there is a case for being able to tell apart your 500s from your 200s in RUM?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually had from an Akamai's perspective, we've had a bunch of customers ask to be able to report on what their customers are seeing for error pages and such. And so we go through all these hoops to kind of round trip the status code through the HTML and stuff like that. Because they want to measure the performance or measure how often it happens or what have you. And while network error logging helps in some ways, it's hard to tie it directly to the user in some cases. So if like you have a user navigating through a site and then they have a session ID or cookie or something, you lose that as part of network error logging often because it's hard to transport that with the network error log. So it could be helpful to see these kind of bumps in the road via RUM if that data was part of it. Now, this may be more just appropriate to solve in resource timing. And then
potentially, but
the data would be here.
Timing also adds other complications regarding the opt-in,
right?
Which navigation timing doesn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah, but generally, I think this is generally an L3 question. But if you're saying this is a use case you have also run up again, maybe you can comment on that issue, clarifying that, and then we can, label it as a feature request for L3.
I will do that. Yep.
Cool. Thanks. Awesome. Okay. And I think we can look into user timing. Issue 69. Allow performance.measure to specify caller parameters for performance visualizations in DevTools. That's a tricky one. Because, I think we don't have any other, of the entries that have any kind of DevTools interaction, and here it seems like it wouldn't. Like a caller parameter seems overly specific. Like it feels overly specific. I don't know. What do y'all think?
So I just saw this issue. Some idea that comes quickly to mind is to look at console logging, and there's a bunch of ways to decorate console log messages. I don't know how standardized those are or how much those are based on conventions for the particular browser and DevTools. But one of the suggestions here was just to use the detail tab, and like each DevTools provider will publish their own conventions as opposed to standardizing them.
Yeah. That seems, yeah. That seems like a better way to tackle this. Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be consensus on the issue that just passing color directly is not the way to go. Yeah, it might be interesting to loop in Chrome DevTools folks as well as Safari DevTools folks, the Firefox DevTools folks, and see what would be like from their perspective, what would be the best way for those different measures to be marked. Alternatively, we could also think of like maybe there are different categories that people could somehow lump those measures into, and then DevTools can make sense of that. But I don't have a clear mental image or proposal of what that may look like. So yeah, I think I can take an action item to loop in the Chrome DevTools folks. Alex, could you try to loop in Safari DevTools folks onto that thread and see see what they say in terms of passing along that information from developers to the console or to the DevTools?
I'll pass it along. It seems a little strange to me, but I don't really work on our inspector, so they have their own opinions. I'll let them know.
Cool, thank you. I for what it's worth, I agree with the strangeness, but maybe there are already channels for developers to do those sort of things, or maybe there's, the site will provide the different marks and measures, and then they can have a console command that can somehow, color them in different ways. I don't know, but it seems like they would have ideas on that front that I at least don't. Okay, cool. Anything else on this one?
Just as for food for thought, it looks like the console API supports passing CSS properties, and then the browser vendors list out which particular properties they're willing to accept. And it's not the full set of CSS, but they borrowed an existing thing that developers are comfortable with. So you can have font style and color and background color, etc. So all you need to standardize is how you provide your list of props, and then the props get handled in a browser specific way.
Interesting. Cool, thanks. And finally, with the 4 minutes we have left, issue 68 for user timing. Okay, something slightly similar. Allow marks and measures to be exposed to developer tooling, but not added to the performance timeline. Annie, do you want to discuss that, like to bring up the use case?
I think it's similar to the color one, where like developers want to be able to filter out what shows on the timeline as opposed to change the color of what shows on the timeline. Ideally, these two would be kind of solved by the developer tooling folks.
Okay. So yeah, so similarly, we can loop them into this one and see what they say. Although at least the title, it seems like they want those marks and measures in developer tooling, but not in the timeline.
That's
Yeah,
what I had heard when I had talked to them. That's how I understood it. But like, if you read the comments from like B. Gerard, I think they actually do just not want to spam the performance timeline so much. There was definitely a bug in Chrome's implementation where it was too slow, and we fixed that. So there's a couple of different issues conflated here.
Okay.
I still don't get this issue. Like, how would you, like, why, like, how would you create these entries and put it in the developer tooling, but somehow not have them in memory? Like,
I think that if developer tooling is not on, which is the 99% case, then all these console dot whatever calls are doing, or I don't know if they're doing nothing, because if the developer tools are being opened afterwards, they appear there. Yeah, so they must be doing something.
it feels like
Yeah.
they want a debug mode for their user timing, which I feel like it should be them implementing their debug mode instead of us providing that option. Right?
They do have that. They were saying like right now they kind of have to turn all the user marks and measures on or all of them off, and they had like different levels of like libraries. So like there's a framework versus the actual library code or the user code.
Yeah, I will. So I will take an action item to read through this and potentially also loop in the DevTools folks and see if this is something that we actually want to provide. But it feels, yeah, I tend to agree with Nicholas that this is like potentially best implemented in userland rather than having the browser provide that option to turn off marks that are being called by the developer. Okay. And with that, we're fashionably a minute over time. So thanks all. And yeah, I will see you all in a couple of weeks.
Cheers.
Great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheerio.